I talk to everybody, and my friend Lisa, we used to go grocery shopping together, and she would be like, I can hear you talking to people 3 aisles over. She's like, I know you don't know them. You're just talking to them.
Like, you're just a friendly person.
I get asked all the time to get things for people, or do you know what this is? Like, I was at the glass house last week, and a lady comes up to me, and she's like, can you get me some of those water lilies? And I'm like, I can, but I'm not sure I should. Like, I don't know. All the time, because I'm talking to everybody, right? All the time.
That's fine.
Can you hear my background? Can you hear my kids? Can you hear them in the background? No?
No.
They're doing schoolwork in the other room.
Sonny's class is playing the $10,000 pyramid right now. So they Fridays for their Google Meet is always a game. And,
How often do they meet?
They meet on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So Monday and Wednesday, Monday and Wednesday are like a lesson, and usually a math lesson, and then Friday is a game. So,
wow.
Yeah, they have. She really likes it. They did Family Feud last week. Family Feud, yeah, and then this week, and they've done scavenger hunts and Name That Tune stuff. So that's pretty cool.
Hi, Sammy.
Hi. How are you today, Sammy?
I'm okay. I'm having a hard time dealing with there's 2 weeks left of school.
Hang in there.
Sad or happy?
Do you have to ask stuff?
No, I threw an internal party yesterday when I finished report cards. I'm like, yes!
For sure.
That is exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's how my week is going.
I used to find when I finish my report cards and they're after that little party of yes, it's done, then it's like, what do I usually do? What do I worry about when I'm not worried about report cards? I need to remember what life was like.
Don't you find when you take your course too, when it's done,
yes.
What am I doing?
Yeah. When it's done, you're like, oh yeah, what was my life like before that?
Well, I went for a walk this morning and I was just commenting on how anticlimactic it'll be when we go into summer holidays this year. It's just gonna seem so, I don't know, it's just gonna feel weird this year.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, do you wanna wait a little bit, or do you wanna get started?
I think it's 11. We might as well get started, Teresa.
Okay. Do you want to share? Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. We're happy to have 2 more of our program team members here, Nicole and Gretchen.
Hello.
So this will be so next week's our last week. Angela, Steph, and I. So here we are. And like I said, we have Gretchen and Nicole here as well. So we're going to play on the traditional territory acknowledgement.
Oh, I'm sorry. What happened? I thought I clicked it.
We acknowledge that the land on which we are gathered is part of the traditional territory of the Chippewa, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Delaware nations. These indigenous nations, known as the Anishinaabeg and Lenape, agreed through their ancestral languages to the mutual sharing of the land with obligations and responsibilities to the environment. Today, these responsibilities and obligations extend to all peoples.
Thank you. So we were just, if anyone wants to share how your week went, I'm sure with report cards being done, that's a big relief. Anything that's on your mind, or how do you plan to wrap up the school year with your students being remote learning? Anybody feel like sharing?
I had a win this week. So I started doing Google Meets with my primary kids a couple weeks ago. Other than attendance dropping in all my classes this week, but I had a win with a couple of my primary kids. I have 3 girls that joined me in my grade 1-2, and they're on the stronger side. So we had a heyday. I put up a book from Book Creator that I had done, and they picked to do that one. And they took turns reading it and talking out with each other what it meant. And it was amazing. So they're starting to learn how to read, and they're in grade 1, going into grade 2. And I'm just like, yes, you guys are killing it. Thank you so much. So that was my win this week.
That's awesome.
Great.
That's the one thing I think with the remote learning is it just allows for so much more small group instruction, right? That otherwise it's hard to do in the classroom environment. So with the small group Google Meets, it's a little bit more personalized.
Yeah, and I had one kid for my 5-6. She's always there, but her progress during remote learning has been amazing, because it's only been her and another student really, but this week the other student didn't show, so it was just her, me, and another administrator who was with us. We played Key Switch with each other, and she had a ball. She asked to play. I'm like, all right, let's go. So, and we went all in French. We didn't have to translate anything. So I'm like, this is awesome. And she's grade 5.
That's great. Anybody else have anything to share? No. Any ideas for wrap up? Anybody have any ideas what you're going to do, or is there any plans? Sammy, your face looks maybe.
I've been thinking about this all morning because I'm starting to kind of organize what I want to do. Like I said, my attendance dropped drastically this week, especially my 7/8s. They're done. They've dropped out. So what I'm going to do, like I made last week really simple too, but they actually gave me something to look at for my 6/7s. My 7/8s didn't even touch it. I think I'm going to do, here's a classroom, or here's a bulletin board. Here's some game ideas, some activities you can do. Pick 3 and tell me which ones you did. Like, just, you're going to be like, tell me which ones you did. Like, that way I know that they're still doing something, but like, I'm not going to make them submit an assignment because they know I'm done report cards. They know that I'm not assessing them at this point. Like, they're like, last 2 weeks of June, whatever. So I'm going to just give them some links to different games and things they can do, and they can tell me what they did.
Yeah, kind of with the pickup of people's belongings, kind of almost that was a closure for many. So hopefully we'll see how the next 2 weeks go. Do you want to, anybody else? All right.
I just gave some culture, like a culture activity where they had to watch a cooking show thing and learn how to make chocolate mousse and answer some questions about what the TV chef was doing, just to kind of, I don't know, I was looking for something a little different to do, and they seemed to like that.
That's great.
Lena, was it in French, the video?
The video wasn't. I used, because sometimes I show them in class and we kind of do it half in French and half in English. It's CBC Gem has a thing called Little Paris Kitchen.
Oh, cute. Okay.
Yeah, and I posted everything else I've done has been posted in French, but I've done these 2. I did one on quiche Lorraine and one on chocolate mousse, just as kind of a fun sort of little culture thing. I'm not sure if I mentioned, I posted a Ricardo video about bread making earlier that was in French that they only had to watch 2 minutes of. It was tricky because he's so fast, but it was only 2 minutes. And they had to tell me, and it was bread, so there was like 4 ingredients. So they had to tell me what he put in and how much. And that was it, to keep it limited so they wouldn't, so their heads wouldn't explode. But that one was good too.
Awesome. It's exciting.
Yeah, they seem to like it.
So we have our 2 friends here, including all voices in the classroom. So Gretchen and Nicole. I'm not sure who's going first.
Can I share my screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're just, there we go.
Alrighty. Okay, so I'll just start. My name is Gretchen Sands Gamble, and I am the Elementary Indigenous Education Special Projects teacher. I'm from Bukidnon, so I'm from Walpole Island, and I'm an Anishinaabe. And so I'm here to talk a bit about making sure that we're amplifying many voices in our classrooms, okay? And Nicole, do you want to introduce yourself too right now?
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Nicole Hooper and I am the Learning Commons coach for our board. And today I'm just sharing something that I'm doing within my own school, and hopefully that you'll find some value in it as well. And it connects to what Gretchen is going to be talking about, amplifying those marginalized voices as well.
Thanks. Okay, so as you may or may not know, June is the National Indigenous History Month, and June 21st is National Indigenous Peoples Day here in Canada. So these days, so Indigenous Peoples Day is a day for all Canadians to celebrate the successes and the history and the heritages and cultures of the Indigenous people of this land, right? And so when I say Indigenous, that's kind of an umbrella term for First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people. And then within like the First Nations group of people, there's many nations. So when I say I'm Anishinaabe or Ojibwe, that's a nation, or Cree, or when we say the Lenape Nation. So that falls under the First Nations umbrella there. Let's see here. So I've got a slide here to share. So I came on before and I talked about some resources. I was really trying hard. I've been visiting a lot of the office hours lately, so I've been trying to remember what I've said at all of them. And I think I remember sharing videos about powwows too with this group, I think. I can't remember. It was a while ago when I was here, I think. So I want to talk today about amplifying many voices. So, and there's a lot of self-reflection in this, and there's also the idea of marginalized voices as well. So when I say marginalized voices, that means the voices of people who have been pushed to the side. You know, they're those voices that are not centered or often not amplified in our classrooms. So I just want to start with to talk about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So in the early 1990s, residential school survivors here in Canada started telling their stories. And before that, it wasn't the residential school experience and history of the residential schools were not really talked about in schools at all, or even like in mainstream media. And so during this time, people really started to listen and to understand. Even still, people don't fully believe that it happened because nobody really ever learned about it. So in 2006, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was formed, and this group started to interview survivors of the residential school system. So that was 6,500 survivors, and their families were interviewed. And in 2015, the final report was published. And so in the Truth and Reconciliation report, there were the stories that were recorded and pictures, and also 94 calls to action. And these 94 calls to action are for all Canadians to work towards reconciliation. There are calls to action for various groups, including the justice system, the health system, and the education system, and there's more. And this one here, the call to action 63.3, I feel is really important for us as teachers to focus on. So we are called to build student, and I like to say, and teacher capacity too, because that's part of my job too. So build student and teacher capacity for intercultural understanding, empathy, and mutual respect. And so by sharing voices, sharing marginalized voices, bringing those voices to the center, we are going to help to work toward this call to action. I always like to tell people that we need to find comfort in
being uncomfortable in this situation, because as teachers, we know that if we don't challenge students, they're not going to learn. They're just going to stay where they are, really. And so we know as a society right now that if we just keep doing what we're doing and just staying the same and not pushing or leaning into that discomfort, we're just going to keep getting the same thing we've always gotten, and it's obviously not working. So I just like to say that it's uncomfortable history. It's acknowledging that there are inequities in our society, and that can be uncomfortable. You know, I've been have many uncomfortable conversations with parents when I was in the classroom, because they did not like the fact that I was teaching the true history of Canada, or they didn't like the fact that I was amplifying marginalized voices in the classroom. But that's not the way that it should be. We need to make sure that we are amplifying marginalized voices. Okay, so in this work, I feel like there are some important questions that we need to ask ourselves. Okay, so in the school system, in the public school system, in the media, whose voice has traditionally been shared? Whose voice are you regularly sharing? And whose voice needs to be amplified? Whose voices do we need to move from the margins into the center to make sure that those voices are being amplified in our classroom, in our daily conversations with people? Like, we need to work on all of this. Okay. Oh, and if there's any questions or comments, put it in the chat, or you can speak up, because I have no problem answering any questions. I have to turn the chat off though, so I can't tell if anybody has a question. I can't have it up, or I get so distracted I forget what I was saying. So
we can monitor that for you.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, like, you know, ask away. So this here's an infographic that I found reflecting the diversity in children's books in 2018. So there was a 2015 version, and it has been updated in 2018. So just take a look at it, and in the chat or through your microphone or whatever, just maybe talk about what you notice, or how this makes you feel, or any reflections that you have on this. So give you a second to look at it.
I saw this on Twitter for the first time, and it surprised me. I guess I really wasn't paying attention. And then the 27% animals, like I see that in my children's book, it's all animals, but to beat out everything, it surprised me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly, Angela. Angela just wrote in the chat, crazy that animals are more represented than humans, you know?
Mm-hmm. And if you add up the ones to the left of the animals, those numbers, like the animals is still more than the kids on the left, right?
And are you going to talk about the mirrors, yeah. Gretchen?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So I've read articles about books and resources that we use in classrooms as being windows and mirrors, right? And so if you look at the mirrors, you know, we notice that there's a lot of mirrors here for the white child, a lot. And if you look in the mirrors, you see lots of really positive reflection, really positive representation of that child, right? So he can be anything. That's what all the mirrors are showing him. As we move to the left, though, those mirrors continue to get smaller and smaller. And so not only are they getting smaller, though, but we can see that the mirrors are getting damaged. So that also shows that the books that we do have, not only is there less representation, but it can also include very often stereotypes or damaging representation. So the way that the First Nation student here on the end sees himself represented in the very few books that there are is not often a very positive representation. So that's the books as mirrors. But if we think about it as books as windows too, right? Like a window into seeing somebody else's experience. So this boy here way over on the right might be looking through a tiny, tiny window that isn't clear, and is seeing also misrepresentation of Indigenous people here on the very far left. So those ideas, those stereotypes, those racist ideas get perpetuated through the resources that we are using. I saw something came up in the chat. Is there? Okay. So yeah, just to think, this really helps us to think too about what we are using in our classrooms, what resources we're using in our classrooms. If we have posters up on the wall about families, you know, whose family is being represented, you know.
Sorry, Gretchen, in the chat, it was just about somebody went to the primary session and saw this image and shared the concept back with their staff, and now everyone's looking in their own classroom libraries.
Yeah.
So
Awesome. Yeah, that's so good. And that's so good to hear, you know, like that is carrying that learning on and, you know, challenging everybody. And maybe it wasn't a very comfortable conversation when you had that conversation with your staff, right? But, you know, it's so important. And these are things that a lot of people probably haven't even had to think about before, or, you know, and once you start reflecting on it and thinking about it, it's something that you really start to notice more and more. So yeah, I'm really glad that you did that. Whoever said it, I can't see the chat, but thank you. So by amplifying marginalized voices and sharing the stories and the voices of Indigenous people or marginalized people, whether that, you know, are immigrant families or Black families or families in the LGBTQ community, we are challenging stereotypes. We are ensuring that students experience diverse perspectives so that, again, those windows out to see people who are different from them. Making space for marginalized people to share their voices and their stories, because if you think about it, and I always go back to Indigenous people because that's my role with the board, right? But if you think about it, Indigenous people have not had control over their image in the media or in schools or the books that we read since forever, right? And we're just now starting to realize that we need to include those voices in our school to demonstrate that there is value in languages and there is value in the culture and the history. And that value should be shared with all students. You know, even if you think that you don't have any Black students or if you don't have any Indigenous students in your school, we still need to ensure that all students are seeing that value. So in amplifying marginalized voices, including the voices and representation of the families in our schools, we're helping all students feel a sense of belonging in our schools. We were talking about anti-oppression work yesterday, and, you know, anti-oppression work and including marginalized voices is good for everybody, for all students, right? And then we're working toward that call to action 63.3 of building student capacity for empathy and mutual respect. I wanted to share something from the Sinkwit School. So they've been doing a lot of work there, including Indigenous voices and inviting people into the school and reading books together and inviting visitors in. And it was, for the past few years, they've been doing a lot of really cool work there. And so this little guy here, Logan George, he and his family made a slideshow, a Google slide deck for the school to be shared with all the students. And it was all about him and the powwows and what they mean to him. And he included so many pictures too. So because of the work that has been done there, the inclusion of Ojibwe language, Logan's family feels a strong sense of belonging at the school, that his culture is valued there and his language is valued. So he, you know, his family felt good enough to send all these pictures to be shared with all the students. And I like that. That's what makes me feel good. You know, we're doing some good work here. So, yeah. Mhm. Okay, so how do we amplify marginalized voices? And again, it's trying to find resources that are created by the people whose voices that we want to share. We want to make sure that it's normalized to see Indigenous people. It's normalized to read books about Black families and about families with two moms, right? We want to make sure that it's just normal and it's not just something that we do during Indigenous Heritage Month or Pride Month or when there's a lot of stuff in the news, right? We want to make sure that this is just something that we do all the time. And I think like there is a message that gets sent to students, you know, when we think about the spaces that our students are in. You know, I went my entire school career never having a Black teacher. And I started my schooling on Walpole Island. So I had Indigenous teachers there for kindergarten and grade 2, but that was the only time ever. When I started public school with the public school board, I never had an Indigenous teacher. And, you know, that is a message that's being sent. So we need to really make sure that we are sharing many voices in our classroom because they're not always represented by the people who work in the schools. I keep getting chat alerts. I don't know.
Yeah. I'll interrupt right now. I was just waiting
okay,
for the
yeah.
pause.
Yeah.
So Julie just had mentioned that as a core French teacher, they're in a very special position where they can affect so many students because they work with all students in a building that they really have an opportunity for some great impact. And then Mary Lynn had mentioned that there are Indigenous students in all of our schools, and plus we need all students, not just Indigenous students, to recognize our Canadian heritage and history. And it makes me think, just that comment there is that as French teachers specifically, we recognize the importance of French history and French culture as part of our Canadian history alongside with our English. So we equally have a role to play in amplifying Indigenous voices as Canadian culture.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. And I like we've talked about how like it's difficult sometimes to find resources, but in French. And so this was something that I talked a lot last year with teachers about, and it's like, well, include artwork, you know, by Indigenous artists, or include the pictures in your classroom that include people of color, you know, like there are lots of ways to do it. Invite people into your classroom to maybe talk about parts of their culture and then find French words around that. So there are ways to do it, but we need to make sure that we are including many voices, especially marginalized voices.
So just while you're talking about that, Gretchen, in the chat, I put a link to Indigenous resource books. These are all books that are available in French. So some of them are definitely the language level would be quite challenging, but with the teacher through a read aloud and all those supports, there are ways we can bring it into the classroom, like you said. So I just put that in the chat for anyone who is looking for some resources.
And I know that there were some French books purchased for the French immersion schools. But one thing that we talked about with Core French too is, you know, to read a picture book in English and then ask some questions about some of the pictures maybe in French to talk about the things that you see in those pictures. So
Absolutely.
There's ways to get around it to make sure that we are amplifying many voices. All right, so I want to let Nicole talk now because she's got some really good resources here. Do you want me to keep the screen on, Nicole, or do you want to share?
Can I share my screen, Gretchen? I've just kind of been continuously evolving it, so it is constantly evolving, and
let me see, where is it?
What you have has changed a little bit.
Just 1 second. There we go. Okay. All yours, Nicole.
Thank you. Can you see that?
Most.
Yeah. It's up.
Is that good now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I found a resource that people have been developing these like Bitmoji classrooms, but have been compiling some resources. So I found some resources, and then I've been previewing and making sure that the books that I've chosen for this classroom have safe YouTube links all set up for them as well, if we are going to use it for our students, and just to make sure that it keeps that learning focused as well. So I'm constantly finding new books, and this is what I have so far, and it's a work in progress. And it's what I've built so that when I'm sending out students some information, I can pick one book from this library and I can paste it into a link to send to my students. I can upload it, I can post it into an assignment, or through whatever means. And the students can just have that one book and be focused on that learning. So when you go into a book, like I said, it's all safe YouTube linked. And I was in the process, as Gretchen was talking, of sharing it with all of you, so I'll continue to do that after. And I'm keeping it open as everyone can be editors, and I've saved my own copy of it as well. But I'm hoping that people can share and add to it as well if you find some resources that would fit well on a certain page. This page here is just a general page of let's talk about race, a kid's book about racism. We have A for Activist, All Are Welcome. Down here is a row of French resources. So over time, and I mean, many of you might have some resources that are French digital books as well that can be added in here to this shelf. Feel free to edit for everybody. The next page you'll see, we have Indigenous resources that either have Indigenous character written by Indigenous authors. Okay, and then this page here, we have Black authors, Black characters. This page here, again, developing just other books as well. So this will continue to be built up over time. And then here, I'm also going to add a page for LGBTQ+, as I come across some resources that will be added there as well. So you might have your own purpose for it in how you want to use it, but definitely for me, it's not going to be a whole library that I will send out to a family. It would be something that the teachers, myself, and the teachers in my school will just pull books from, copy them and paste them into an activity or a read aloud for that day, or however they would like to use it. So if anyone has any questions or suggestions, I'm completely open to suggestions in terms of how you think this could be set up different even, or what else you think it could include as well. Completely open to ideas.
Okay, good. Are you going to share this in the chat, Nicole, or do we have like a sharing resource? I forget what we do with this.
I was just on my iPad here. I was typing in their names to share with them, to share this with them. If that's the way we want to do it, I can do it that way.
Good.
I was just going through the participant list as long as I have their first and last name there. Like Jane, I'm not sure, so.
I can help you. Or Jane, go ahead, just throw it in the chat box there.
Okay. And I'll check that out and I can share it. I can put the link in there as well. Gretchen, do you think that would work better?
It might be easier for you, but.
Yeah. Either way, however you like to do it.
Okay, I'll do both. I'll add it in the chat, and then I can also add everyone here to the document too.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. I really like how you set that up. Well,
yeah, no, I think that's awesome, Nicole. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And so there are resources in here in Seesaw. I don't know how many teachers who use Seesaw, but if you search Ojibwe, there's lots of 5 resources in there now. And Deb Lumley added some cool ones, and they have the Ojibwe language in them a lot. Indigenous, so the Indigenous Heritage Month Outdoor Learning Commons that I created, and then Melissa Dent had a couple in here too. One's about music, and one is a really good coloring book. So again, I talked about this before, so I'm not going to go too much into it again. Just a resource. I can share the Google link for you too if you don't use Seesaw. And actually, I'm going to share my whole resource list in the chat for you to go to, so you can find it in there. There's the information about the 4 First Nations in our area. So Aamjiwnaang, Lenape, Lakawit, which is also known as Moraviantown or Delaware Nation, Kettle and Stony Point, and Bikajunang. There's Ojibwe books, really fun video for dancing too, lessons. If you have French immersion, you could do, or even in your core French, you could do this in French. There's a task in there about creating a poster or writing a letter. You could use the French language in there as well. So this is just a time to think about what holds value in your learning community and how do we share that, you know, like things we put on the wall or the resources that we share. I'm just challenging people to maybe shift their thinking a little bit and to really reflect on that. How do we share marginalized voices and show that their stories and the voices and the history and heritages hold value in our learning communities? Okay, so again, find the comfort in that discomfort, because sometimes it will be uncomfortable. And you know, self-reflection is sometimes uncomfortable, but it's good. Okay, so if you have any questions at all, I will answer them, or I will help you with resources. You can find me here on Twitter, or you can email me. Okay, so if there's any questions now, I will be happy to answer them. Okay. Thank you for having me, ladies. I'm going to put the my resource list in the chat right now too.
While you're doing that, Gretchen, I also have another list that I'll put in the chat of additional French language resources, not specific to Indigenous, but just more inclusive in general. So I will also add that. So if you are looking to build your library, there's some more stuff there.
Right. Well, and I think as educators, we're the ones who obviously have to bring it into the classroom, and by talking about it, that's how we get it going. So having all these resources would be very helpful. So thank you both for sharing.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Any questions or ideas or how maybe you could use it? My kids are getting loud. Hold on. Sorry, everyone.
Their schoolwork is getting loud, eh?
Yeah, it must be done. I liked how that family felt comfortable to share the. That's so cool. What school did you say that was at again? Basanquet?
That was at Basanquet, yeah.
So neat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard different stories like that too, where there have been families where they come in for maybe open house or something and they see Ojibwe words posted, or if they're in there for the announcements and they hear like the Ojibwe word of the week or the Ojibwe of Canada, and they, you know, that really builds that sense of belonging there, you know, and we want everybody to feel like they belong, you know, at the school.
Definitely. Yeah, there's a few schools in Sarnia too that have the Ojibwe word underneath the English word, which is really neat. You know, just pronouncing them is the
yeah. There's some schools where they have a QR code up too, where you can scan it and you can hear the word and like how to pronounce it and everything too.
Oh, cool.
And I can help with that if anybody's interested in using those Ojibwe words of the week or anything like that. I can help with that as well.
Yeah, Gretchen's always willing to help, so we're lucky to have her.
Thanks.
Any other sharing? So like we mentioned, next week will be our last week. Angela, do you want to, or Steph, do you want to add to that?
Really, all we have planned for next week at this point is we want to take a time to meet with you guys like we have been, and use it as a time of reflection and think about what needs will be going forward for the fall. It's hard to know exactly because we don't know exactly what the fall is going to look like, but just trying to anticipate what those needs might be and how we can support you going forward. So if you'd like to be part of that conversation, we would love to have you and hear your voices next week about that.
I think I just saw something in the chat. Christina was saying we do that at our school. Sometimes some of our students present the word of the week.
That's so great. And I really like to hear that too. What school are you at, Christina? I was curious.
I'm at Hyde Park.
Hyde Park? Okay, yeah, awesome. No, I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And there is that feeling of belonging, right? And also just that showing that there is, you know, value in the language, you know, what's being said over the announcements, right? So it's a really good thing to share. So thank you.
I like when the students do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was, I forget what school it was at, but they had started posting the words around the room, and it was at the open house, and the mom was there with the child, and she was like, that's our language there. That's Ojibwe. That's what our family speaks. And they had never really had a conversation about it at home before. And just that conversation came up at the school because, you know, the school is taking the time to show that the language has value there. So I really like hearing those stories where the families really feel that sense of belonging. So
yeah, our teachers do that too. They'll post it on their word walls.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah. So we have a website that includes, I'll share that right now in the chat. And it has like the QR codes that you can post on your word wall and videos about how to pronounce them. So yeah, right here, that I just posted in the chat. So if you want to use them, use videos like for next year, you know, if you want to get it started, Ojibwe Word of the Week, if whatever format we're doing this in, that, you know, there's ways that you could share these. So if you go to the right, like the links to the right, there's a whole part about Ojibwe Word of the Week, and that will have all of the posts about the Ojibwe words. Oh, right up there, yeah, under pages. Yeah. Ojibwe Word of the Week. So this was a project that a few teachers worked on last year. And so they also had reflections about the learning that they were doing because they spent time in the First Nation communities, and they also invited people into their classrooms. And so there was that reflection piece on it, but there was also the learning the Ojibwe words. So the videos are on there, the QR codes, there's PDFs with the words that you can print off.
Yeah, I think I saw this already because I included that in our announcements too, and posted it to Seesaw so they could scan the QR code and go to that. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks. So yeah, you probably saw like everybody in my family in these videos too. So yeah. And they were able to connect them to books too. So that was one thing that they worked to do. At first, the plan was they were going to have visitors come in and then talk about the words, but sometimes it was difficult at different times of year to get a visitor to come in. So then they connected them to picture books. And so the words would go with the books that they're reading. Yeah. Cool. Mm-hmm.
It says the Lambton College powwow. Is that held at our college here in Sarnia?
Yeah. Last year, a bunch of schools went to it. So yeah, it was. Yeah. It was a lot of kids went. They had a lot of students go to it, and for a lot of people, it was the first powwow that they had ever gone to. So it was good, and there was a lot of learning that was done around it first. And I went into this class and we talked about what powwows are and, you know, the etiquette at the powwow. And and that kind of stuff. And they read books and watched videos to get ready for it. Yep. And these two classes too here, it was at PE McGibbon and then one class at AA, right? They took their year-end field trip out to Walpole Island too, because they did so much learning through the year about Walpole Island and the Ojibwe language. And so then that was their year-end field trip. They came out and they went to a park. The older kids went fishing for the day and did archery. And then the younger kids had some people come visit, and there was singing and dancing and drumming. And then they played at the park and had lunch and stuff. So yeah, it was just really nice way to wrap it all up.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. So we're coming near the end. I think that's all we have for today. Unless you have anybody want to share anything else? No? Quiet group today.
That's okay. Lots of thinking happening.
Lots of thinking.
Yeah.
Lots of reflecting.
Mm-hmm.
So you've added the links into the chat, so feel free to grab those if you need them, or you can reach out to any of us if you need them.
Mm-hmm.
Here we are.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you to both Gretchen and Nicole for coming out today. We appreciate that, sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.
And thank you to all of our participants today. Have a lovely weekend, everybody.
Happy sunny Friday.
Yeah, get outside.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you.